the SBP Podcast. I'm your host, Susie Botello, and you're listening to episode 55. How many times have you imagined a story? Perhaps you're like me, and you see a story in everything. Maybe you see a photo and a story comes to mind. A lot of our memories are stories. There are stories that come to us. We think they come out of nowhere. I think that stories are a bit like cooking, though. Let's take the ingredients. We take our memories, our experiences, our imagination, maybe a bit from dreams, and we toss in a little wishing, and well, then you just mix it all up and put it in the oven. Of course, it's a little more complicated than that, but do you add a cup of imagination and a tablespoon of memories, or do you flip that, vice versa? The process of storytelling is magical in many ways. There is an art and a science to it. But I encounter people who are doubtful that they have any abilities in art or science, and I'd like to help you believe that you have both, and then some. But you will never believe me unless you try. You most likely have a smartphone. In this world, more people have access to a smartphone than a toothbrush. Yeah, I read that statistic somewhere years ago, and it just stuck to me. So I am betting that you have access to one too, right? Even if it's through a friend or a relative. Now, our guest in this episode is an actor who has had the privilege of working on many short and feature films, even Hollywood films like King Kong, District 9, Lord of the Rings, and The Hobbit. Have you heard of any of these? Jed Brophy shares his experience working with director Stef Harris and actor Mark Hadlow in a feature film shot with the iPhone. The International Mobile Film Festival was launched 10 years ago after a few years considering this idea that people could make films using mobile phones. Sometimes the timing of an idea is not the best time to launch it, so I had to wait until 10 years ago. I wanted to bring respect to storytellers who would make films using smartphones by launching a film festival which only accepted films shot with cell phones to put them on a big screen and roll out the red carpet and give the filmmakers the true film festival experience. A lot of people since then, back in 2009, have made films using their cell phones or smartphones. The camera in your phone is getting better with each new phone. And that is part of what we will be discussing during the film festival in San Diego, which always takes place on the last weekend of April. We'll share a link on the notes, but you can remember this: www.internationalmobilefilmfestival.com. This episode is about to inspire you in a big way. Jed Brophy is experienced in the film industry, and to hear what he says through your ears in a conversation with all of us, it's very special. He also has a message for all of you. Whether you have already tried, whether you're just thinking about it, or wondered, now is the time. Listen to Jed and download this episode so you can listen anywhere, anytime. And now, let's talk to Jed and listen to his stories. Hey everybody, welcome to the SBP Podcast. I am here in San Diego talking to Jed Brophy in New Zealand. Am I correct?
That is correct. You've said it very well. New Zealand, or Aotearoa as we call it.
Aotearoa. Did I say that?
That's correct.
I'm getting better.
You are.
The reason I'm talking to Jed is, well, first of all, it's pretty awesome to talk to an actor who's had his level of experience, and I'm going to ask him to share some of that. But also, Jed is one of the protagonists, one of the principal actors in a film that has been making the rounds on social media. It was shot with an iPhone 7. And we just had an interview, the last episode, maybe we should call this part 2, with Stef.
Stef Harris?
Yeah, and the thing is, when we were talking to Stef, we talked a lot about, the concept of this film that you guys shot from his perspective. So yeah. I really want to talk about your perspective with him. But before we go there, Jed, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and how you got into your wonderful acting career first?
Yeah, I was going to be a kinesiologist. I went to Aotearoa University to become a physical education instructor and did drama as an outside paper. An actress in this country who does a lot of dialect coaching called Miranda Harcourt suggested I go to drama school, and I applied and went. Did a lot of theatre. And then about 3 years after graduating drama school, I was doing a play with a writer called Stephen Sinclair, who coincidentally co-wrote Braindead with Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh. And Peter came backstage one night and offered me a part in one of his films, a zombie film called Braindead, or Dead Alive, I think it's called in New Zealand, in the US. And I started working in the film industry, which was in those days very low key. There was small budgets for films, not big budget films. Peter was making kind of splatter horror films. And then next up on his list of things and Fran's was a film called Heavenly Creatures, which I was also in, and then was lucky enough to, through various kind of jobs, hook up and do Lord of the Rings, all 3 of Lord of the Rings films with that film company, Wingnut Films and New Line Cinema. And yeah, I've been lucky enough to work as a film actor pretty much ever since. I got to work on Peter's films such as King Kong, did some work as a mocap actor on Tintin, and then got to play Nori, the dwarf in the Hobbit trilogy. So back to Middle-earth again, which was something I never thought I'd do. So yeah, I think I've done about 40 feature films now, and
is that all?
Yeah, I might learn a bit about the craft soon if I'm careful.
That's pretty awesome, though. 40 feature films. That's a lot of work.
It is, and some of them have been huge films. Some of them have been, $100, $200 million films, and some of them have been $12,000 films like Blue Moon. So I've done the gamut, really. Started off in a small part of the film industry and got to work in the big part of the film industry, and now I'm going back to doing some nice little jobs like Blue Moon. I really enjoyed doing that film. Blue Moon was just the 2 actors, really, or 3 or 4 actors. No CGI, just a narrative and a phone. So back to basics.
How, when I was talking to Stef, he was saying that basically because the film has a lot of dialogue, it's all shot around one location. And there's so much dialogue in that film, but there's also a lot of character development because of that as well. Yeah. And he said you guys really didn't have that much time to I was telling him I was a script supervisor, and people who have even an entire year to study, an entire screenplay, and especially their parts, right? I'm still getting the line, but with you guys were running it through like a stage play, right?
Mark and I have done a lot of theatre, and in fact, that's where I met Mark 30-odd years ago. He was doing a play at Circa that I was doing the lights for. I was still a student. And between us, we've probably done 150 stage plays. And we rehearsed it like a play. We had 3 months in between doing a one-night test to see how the phone worked as a camera. We had 2 scenes to learn, and we learnt 4. And I think we realised then that if we broke it down into parts, like we broke the script down to 7 sections, his arrival, my arrival, we called one of them the money, one of them was school. So we looked at different sections of the film and learnt those as kind of 7, 8, 9-page bits of text. When we got on set, we just found that it was all in there. We kind of remembered it. And we talked during the day about how we might shoot certain scenes, about, how and how much intensity would be in them. So when we got onto set, we did very little on-set rehearsal, just basically put the clothes on. Stef told the camera person where to be and sort of looked at where we'd be placed in the room, and then we just shot until it fell apart. And I think our longest take, Stef said, was about 11 minutes, and that was a whole, chunk of dialogue. So yeah, you get better when you do it. You get better at learning it fast, and especially working for Peter, because he doesn't give you the script the night before. You get the script when you work for him on the day.
Oh.
So you get quite good at processing speedily.
Yeah, and I could imagine, you were talking about $12,000 and hundreds of millions of dollars.
Millions. Yeah.
That's just a little bit of pressure, right? When you're giving the script the night before or that same day.
Yeah, they tend to work with actors who are pretty keen to get it right as well. There's a bit of responsibility, especially when you're playing real characters, especially in films like The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. They're much loved characters, and you kind of want to get it right. But once you get to the level to work on a film like that, you're pretty keen to do a good job. So, homework in terms of getting your character right is the main thing. Once you sort of know how your character might be, the lines tend to come. It's a weird thing. The more background you do on a character, the easier it is to learn the part for some reason.
Well, you've obviously done some things right by the Lord of the Rings films, because you've only been in, how many?
I've done all 6. So I think Ian McKellen said there was myself and maybe Kate and 1 or 2 others that have been in all 6 films. But that was a bit of luck too. If they hadn't been shot in New Zealand, that may not have been the case. I'm a Kiwi resident, and so having the film shot here was a big plus, really.
Wow. Now, in going back to the Blue Moon film, because the camera, was obviously a little smaller, right, than the ones in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, a lot smaller.
Just about an inch smaller, right? When you were working with that, and you said you came from theater, then you went on to this big, the traditional film cameras, which there are many kinds, but then you went to a mobile film, to work with a mobile film. And I'm just wondering, did you have feelings of, did it take you back to, outside of it being shot, but did it take you back to the stage?
Yeah, it did. We were lucky that we had a locked down location. We just had the one location that we shot in, and that's constricting in one way, in terms of the story has to stay within the boundaries of, and makes sense to be in the boundaries of that particular location. But it gives you a massive amount of freedom to explore the characters, because there's nothing else. It's just you and the set, and there's no artifice. There's, like you say, there's a phone, something of this size, with a lens attached to it and a gimbal and one other person, and it's pretty easy to phase them out. The more crew you have on set, the more clutter there is, the harder it is sometimes to concentrate on your job. But on a film like this, once Mark and I were in our costume, we were like we were on stage. It was just the 2 of us, and everything else kind of disappeared. Having said that, having worked on those big films and being aware of how a camera moves and how slowly you have to walk, for instance, when you want to be captured on a tracking shot, all of that experience of both theatre and film became a really good mix for making that film, making Blue Moon. And we talked about it being like a blast back to the past, where it's just completely character-driven, completely actor-driven. The artifice, or the technical equipment, if you like, never got in the way of what we were trying to do. And that tends, in a big film, you're always aware of the fact that there are 3 cameras sometimes. You're shooting in 3D a lot of the time, so you have to be always aware of what you're doing. This was, it gave us like I said before, enormous freedom to just explore those characters.
Were there any technical differences that you saw between the two sets, as far as, just some technical stuff?
Yeah, look, we had an app, Filmic Pro, on the phone, and we had an app that allowed us to film, to transfer via wireless straight onto a laptop and then onto a hard drive, so the phone never filled up. You always get stoppages on big films. There's always something, because you've got so much going on. If you get a shadow with the third camera or the crane arm, or you might have 16 or 17 people in a scene, and you've got explosions and you've got stunts, and you have to stop all the time. But with this, we were able to just start shooting, and we only stopped when the shot actually fell apart and we had to come around and find another angle. So I think there's only 2 scenes in the entire movie that we went back and reshot for performance or for camera moves. So we were shooting maybe 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes a day of usable footage. You might only get 2 minutes a day of usable footage on a big film because of the stop-start nature and because of the size of stuff that you're trying to capture. 2 people, if you can do a film with really only 2 or 3 people, you save a lot of time. And if you're doing it with one camera person, you're saving even more time. The lights are all preset, so there was no changes in someone coming on set to change the lights, putting a diffuser in. We didn't have a dolly, so there wasn't, having to reset back to number ones and making sure you hit the marks either. We didn't have any marks on the floor. It was up to the cameraman to capture our performance from whatever angle he could get. So a lot on him, a lot of kudos to our one man on the spot and a lot of kudos to Stef for giving us that freedom.
When you had I don't want to give away anything because I don't think I feel privileged that I've watched the film, but a lot of people haven't yet. And I don't want to give any suspense away to anybody, but there's a cool fighting scene in the film. Although most of it is really driven by dialogue, and it does get intense. There's a lot of suspense. It's kind of like, like that night that we've all had where it's like, can something else just kind of come and interrupt, this night, right?
Yeah, I love those kind of films, actually, the ones where you are never quite sure how it's going to end. I'm a great fan of narrative-driven films and, smaller budget films. They're the kind of things that I like watching. But that's one of the only bits of on-set rehearsal that we had really was doing that particular fight because it's got 3 or 4 different parts to it and it kind of escalates to its climax. And yeah, it was interesting trying to map out how to do that and be able to capture it on the one camera. We actually managed to hide another phone in amongst a whole lot of packets of chippies for one of the moments. And we had on-set weaponry, which is always tricky as well. And luckily, Stef, being a policeman, is also an armourer, so that was all locked down and safe. But yeah, and we had people rock up while we were shooting, thinking it was a working service station, wanted to buy pies. So there was a lot of those kind of things that happened that were fun. But yeah, it was that kind of choreography I really like. And Mark and I have done a lot of stage fights and a lot of fighting on film, so we were able to kind of choreograph that ourselves. We didn't need a stunt coordinator. Saved on time and it saved on money, and we kept it safe as well.
Did you have to? Okay, now you had to wear quite a bit of makeup when you were doing some of the characters in some of your films, because Lord of the Rings is not the only film where you've worn makeup, right?
No, I've worn prosthetics a lot. I think the longest makeup I've done is 7.5 hours, and that was for Shaku and Lord of the Rings. But on the Shannara Chronicles for MTV, playing the Doug D'Amore, I had 5.5 hours of makeup, and again on Rings 4, and then I think Nori on The Hobbit was around 3.5 hours of makeup. So I have done a lot of that, and it's not something I would, do if I wasn't being paid well. Sitting in the chair it gets arduous after a while, and anyone that's done a character part where they have to wear a lot of makeup will tell you that it's quite wearying. Great thing about Blue Moon is it was just us wearing our own clothes and being ourselves, so quite liberating from that point of view too.
Yeah, definitely. And and that was what I was going to say in the difference. You didn't have to wear any makeup, and I'm sure that also doesn't that help a little bit with the because you're playing human beings, right?
Yeah.
It helps with your character as well, right?
It does, yeah. It's look, it's fun playing creatures. It's great, but they are, they have different imperatives and they have a different way of motivating themselves, and they have a different mobility a lot of the time. But it's more just the kind of nature of wearing those heavy costumes. It's, you kind of, half the character work is done for you by the costume and by the makeup, and the rest kind of comes from you trying to work through that. Doing something like Blue Moon, like I said, there is no artifice like that. It's just the 2 actors. And so it comes down to be able to create a real character that people can have empathy with. And we were lucky. We had 3 months in between first talking about it and first having a night of shooting to then discussing how we would play these characters and what their backstory was. And that's kind of unique in this country, having that much time. You don't usually get that much time to think about developing a character. And it was all on our own backs. We took it upon ourselves to, find some commonality in these characters with us, but also base them on what we thought were real people. I had a lot of fun playing that character. I don't get to play characters like Darren and Blue Moon very often, and so I'd like to do more of that kind of character work for sure.
What about, is there any possibility you might want to be behind the camera and in front of the camera? I do advise a lot of actors to make their films because,
Yeah, I do. I've got a couple of things I'm writing. I'm writing a TV series actually based on our experience of shooting down in Motueka. It's a kind of a police drama, but a slow police drama, not a fast turnaround shoot-'em-up drama, but something that, again, is character-driven. And I've been working on a film for a year for some friends of mine that I'm going to direct. So that is the next logical step. And I've directed theatre before. I enjoy directing theatre, but film, I feel like I've been around film enough to have a fairly good grasp about how I might go about shooting one.
Yeah, there's a lot of actors that have even grown up in film, like Ron Howard, right?
Yeah,
gone to be wonderful directors.
For sure.
Would you consider making one with a smartphone?
Absolutely. I think it was liberating actually using a smartphone and just looking at what we could actually get and how beautiful it was. I've shown this film to people like Sir Richard Taylor, who came to our screening in Wellington, and he could not believe that we'd shot it on the phone, and I like the fact that people don't believe it. I think that shows the skill involved in actually making it look good, but also the fact that the cell phones themselves and the cameras on them and the adapters that you can get for them, the lenses that various people make are really cutting edge. And so for shooting a story for the first time where you don't have much of a budget, or even if you do, I think they're a brilliant thing. If you're in the right setting, they don't work for everything. They don't work in really low light yet. That's a tricky one. You have to light quite well. But it's really useful. And if you've got a good handheld operator, you can capture, 70% of what you can capture with a whole bundle of lenses on a big flash $450,000 camera. Like I say, there's still limitations, but we were lucky we didn't really see those limitations in our end result. I think it actually comes out looking quite good.
What do you think about the artistic aspect of, what can come through and be developed and on a mobile film as opposed to the traditional films?
There's an intimacy. It's like you're in the room. It's far more like you're a voyeur and you're part of the action, because you have to be close in terms of the way that you use the screen and the way that you use your ability to be able to push in and pull out on a shot. You have to be quite close to the subject matter. And so it has that real feeling of being gritty, realistic. You're in the moment and you're in people's faces. And I like that. When I saw Unsane, I liked the fact that we felt like we were very close to the action and probably shouldn't be there in some aspects, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
At times when it made you feel uncomfortable. And what I like about Blue Moon is we were able to get shots too where the camera was very close to the action and therefore the audience is very close to the action. It kind of builds in the intensity. So I think for storytelling, they're a unique tool, and I see a huge future in people shooting in this way. And also multimedia, you can mix using the phone with cameras if you want, because you can actually, it's a unique kind of look on screen. I like the widescreen aspect that you get with some of the adapters. Takes me back to kind of films from the 70s and 80s, those widescreen films that we fell in love with.
Yeah, and there's also this whole huge part of experimenting with them where you can't really do so much when you're working with big budget films, right?
Yeah, that's right. It makes you be innovative. When you limit yourself in terms of the technology that you have at your fingertips, it creates innovation. And what I've seen with, I was not a believer until we shot. I hadn't seen anything where I went, oh yeah, that's the way to shoot. And I think that's probably the same for most people. It's not until you actually grab a phone, grab the gear, and get out there and make it that you realise just how portable they are and how it's in your pocket. You can always carry the gear with you. You can just pull it out and start filming random stuff at any time, which may actually be useful in a film or a music video. So yeah, I see it. This is an important kind of thing for the future. It's like when beta video came out and it kind of changed video, and then when miniature digital tapes came out, they revolutionized shooting from the hip, and then when the Red came out, it revolutionized shooting digital in a way that actually looks fairly like cinema. I mean, it'd be great to shoot on 35mm all the time and be able to afford to do it, but that's not the reality for most people. So this is the phone itself. I can't wait to do our next one. And the TV series that we're thinking of doing, definitely shoot the pilot using a couple of phones, because that's the kind of look I want to go for.
Oh, well, you're going to have to contact me if you do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, I will. You fly out here and come and be our on-set on the fly on the wall.
Oh, right. I wish I could, I'll be honest with you. It's really wonderful. I have to tell you this personally here in public now, but it's wonderful. I've been a big fan of the Peter Jackson films, and especially the Lord of the Rings, all these films. And there are people around me who attest that I've thought about this film every single day of my life because, it's such an adventure,
It was an adventure, and we kind of had no idea kind of how it was going to change the fabric of fantasy as well. When you're making a film, you don't always know what the end result might be for the audience, for the public in general, but also for the fabric of, mainstream media. It did a lot for this country in terms of tourism, but it also did a lot for us in terms of film infrastructure. Peter was able to build a big studio in Wellington, which enabled other big Hollywood films to come and shoot here, and was probably the reason why James Cameron decided to come and shoot Avatar here. So there've been great things on the back of it. But, what you said before, the adventure, that for me was the biggest adventure I'll ever have on film. You can't ever kind of recreate how we felt making those films, making 3 films at once. I got to be in the horse department training horses, so
Nice.
see a whole other part of the film industry I've never seen before.
When I was a little kid, I used to believe that whatever was happening in a movie was real. So I wanted to be in the movies because I thought you got shot at and got to ride horses and fly and all that stuff. I grew up in Spain up until I was 8 years old. And I took drama classes every time we moved to break in to the new school.
Yeah.
But being in movies, there's something I want to tell you though. So when you're acting and you're on stage, most of the time, right, it's not being filmed and recorded, so no one can really play it back.
Yeah.
And you don't have to see yourself. You're going by the perception of the people in front of you and what they say later. Having to watch it again, that's tough, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't actually know. I haven't worked with many actors that really love watching themselves on screen.
Yep.
It's very hard not to be self-critical about how you think you should look. And I do remember, and I hope Pete doesn't mind me telling you this story, on Heavenly Creatures, there's a scene that I was doing with Mel Linsky as the boarder, and Pete kept saying, he's not cool. I know you want to play him cool, but this character is not cool. He's a bit of a bookworm, and he isn't made of the gym, and he doesn't have any swagger. And as an actor, that's really hard to switch off, because having grown up and watching a lot of westerns and movies made by people like Alfred Hitchcock and John Huston and people like that from the 70s and 80s and even from the 60s, those kind of black and white films, all the actors, all the main cast have a swagger to them. There's a kind of a coolness that actors tend to have on screen. And it's hard not to have that. That's our hardest job, I think, is just to be normal so that people can relate to us. But every now and again you do. There's a great shot in Blue Moon, and you'll know the one where I'm striding across the forecourt. That's my favourite shot in the whole movie, because it's like it's my Dirty Harry moment, striding out, keeping distance from the camera. So yeah, it's stage is a different animal. You do rely so much more on what you're getting from the audience. It's a good and a bad thing, because if it's a bad night, the audience tell you straight away, and then it's a very long night on stage. If you're not entertaining them, it's a long 3 hours before you get off. On film, you just go cut, and go back and do when you like.
There's another aspect to it where your train of thought, because you're so in the moment on a stage in your character, and and in the action that's happening, whatever the event is in the scene. Where in a film, like you were saying before, you're constantly being interrupted.
Yeah.
And having a camera, close-up time to have that camera, within inches of your nose, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It's a bit like separating. It's like partitioning a computer. You kind of partition part of your brain learns to be aware of the technical aspects, but then ignore it. Like hitting your mark, you get quite good at hitting your mark without having to look for it because your spatial awareness on set becomes very attuned if you do it enough. And it's why my advice to young people is to not wait by the phone for getting parts, but get out there and do it. Work with friends and create your own small films, but do it with adherence to the technical aspects of making film, because that stuff, your body learns, it becomes muscle memory, and then your mind can kind of deal with the stuff that the character is dealing with, the intention, the motivation, the subtext, and all of those things. And it's a lot like juggling, working on a film. Really, really good ones manage to do it with ease, and the rest of us kind of struggle along. Watching Ian McKellen go from being Ian McKellen to Gandalf was just a joy because he was able to do it so seamlessly. He'd probably tell you it wasn't seamless for him, but it certainly seemed so to us. And then I've worked with actors who are very method because they can't switch off the technical aspects, so they have to be so in character that they simply don't see the artifice or the technical aspect of it. But yeah, it's not easy getting used to that. It's I always have on my first day of set, I always have a momentary panic of about 30 seconds just before they call the first action for the day. And that part of my brain is going, you are not worthy to be here. You should go home. And then you get over that and you carry on with your day and it's all right.
Yeah, you're there. You got to think about the film, right? The story.
Got to think about the film, and especially when it's someone else's money, you want to get it right.
Well, yeah, that's true. It seems to me like you put a lot of work in Blue Moon. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about how that story? I'm really fascinated by the backstory of that.
Yeah, Mark and I had both been to boarding school. There's a thing here in New Zealand when you hit 12 till about 17, 18, there are schools, sort of private schools, I guess you pay. We call them boarding schools, and you go away from home and you stay there. It's based on the English kind of Eton or Rugby or, one of those colleges. And Mark and I both had that experience of, as young men, going away and being at a boarding school away from home. And the characters in the story have that same subtext. They have that. They've been at school together. They've been at boarding school together. So they've had this kind of formative history through their teenage years, and then something happened. We don't know what it is. Mark and I know. We made up our own story that we hurt someone, and I took the blame for it, and so I left school. And so that subtext kind of we used in terms of building the fabric of the story. There's a point at which I recognise him from school and he knows who I am. And it's like we go back 40 years and we are those same, teenagers or late teenagers that we were back then in terms of how we operate with each other. And we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about what might have happened, who was the dominant person, who had the most status, whether or not I'd bullied him, for instance, as a teenager. That was sort of things we talked about. So while we were shooting, we would shoot in the night time or wake up about 11 o'clock, and he and I would do 2 to 3 hours worth of just talking about scenes that were coming up. Do the lines quite a lot to make sure we had it under our belts, but not characterise it too much. We sort of waited till we got to set. Once they'd put our makeup on and once I got into my costume and went to set, I pretty much just stayed as Darren. Maybe 90% of the time I was still able to joke with the crew, but then probably 5 minutes before we shot, I just jumped into that character wholeheartedly. And Stef was very low-key as a director. He just kind of put the camera in place and then let us start when it felt natural. And Mark and I we had a pretty similar, rationale when it came to actually doing that. I didn't tell him all the time what I was going to do. There's a couple of moments on set where I slap him, and they weren't scripted. They were just things that I thought my character would do. Kind of things that you would only do with someone you trust, someone that you've worked with before, or someone that you've had quite a bit of pre-time with. So again, we were lucky that we had 3 months on and off to kind of make phone calls and and get together and actually meet and talk about this film and the way that we would actually approach that character arc for both of us. So yeah, it was. It's not the most in-depth thing I've done, but it was certainly more in-depth than you would normally do for a film.
Yeah, you can actually, when you were just talking about, the backstory with the two characters, you can see the difference. It's very subtle though, between both of you when you recognize each other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well written, I think, this story as well. And when something is well written, it kind of makes logical sense. You can do a lot more work on fine-tuning that subtext than if you're trying to make a story up. We really liked the story and we liked the arc, and we were able to play within that because it had a really solid structure as a story. So, it all comes back to the text. If the story is good, actors will work a lot harder to try and make that real. But again, Stef didn't push it in terms of time. We didn't have, we were only at 6 hours a night and we were up against it, but he never told us to be faster. He just let us take our own logical pace, so it had a kind of an organic feel to it. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to do another film like this, straight away. It'd be great if he could work like this all the time.
When I first launched this it was a bare bone idea, what if, right? But it was something that I had been developing in my brain since 2003, and we didn't even have anything like that on the phones yet, but I just knew it was coming because where there's photo, where there's a device that has a camera, eventually, just like years and years and years ago, it turned into video, motion picture.
Yeah.
And I waited and I kept patiently waiting. And finally in 2009, I looked and no one was doing this in this way, putting them on the big screen, rolling out the red carpet. But it was a big deal for me to do this. And, you were talking about, the patience that you have to have when you believe in something, where other people just want to rush into an idea and just make it happen. But when you really believe in it and you want to do it right, you really have to wait.
You do. Yeah. I mean, we had a very, in one way we were, we fast-tracked it by just going, well, we're not going to wait for the Film Commission to fund us. We'd been working on a film with Stef that had been with the Film Commission, our funding body, for a couple of years, and it just wasn't moving as fast as we as actors and director wanted to move. We knew we wanted to work together and just didn't want to have to wait. So the story came quite quickly, but it felt like we'd lived with it for a long time by the time we came to shoot it, because we were all invested in terms of we were invested wanting to be good. It was weird. It's not often you get a script where you just go, wow, I wish we were shooting this tomorrow. You kind of, I haven't been that excited by the idea of how we could shoot a story before in a long time.
It's a challenge too.
It is a challenge, and the phone made it practical and it made it accessible. To try and hire a whole crew of 20 or 30 people would have slowed us down. Having a crew of 7 and some of them doubling up, it just meant there was a fluidity to the film. We were tired at the end of it, but I think we kind of knew while we were shooting we'd done something quite good. We were pretty proud of it when we finished. So even before we'd seen the finished product, I could kind of tell it was going to be not a bad film.
Yeah. Well, it means the world to me to have someone in your stature, believe it or not, to basically say to me after all these years, I'm looking at 10 years now, right? 2019 now.
You were right.
Yeah, to have someone like you to say, not so much that I was right, but that you also believe in it, that you're inspired by it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And through this process, I've got a friend who works in Australia, and she has a production company with another friend of hers, and they're looking at doing this as well. I mean, I worked with her last week and talked up, what it was like shooting on this, and she couldn't believe the quality of what we got. So I think the more people see this kind of film and see films like Steven Soderbergh's and see what can actually be done by professionals, who believe in this technology. You know, if it's good enough for Steven Soderbergh, it was certainly good enough for us. And I think if it's good enough for us, it's certainly good enough for other people. I see a huge future, and it can only get better. The more technology tries to keep pace with the rest of the industry, the better it's going to be. But it just has a flexibility that using bigger gear doesn't have.
It also puts the power of storytelling and film in anybody's hands, right?
That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
There is such a limited kind of way that you can get into the mainstream media in terms of mainstream filmmaking. There's a lot of people that we call the doorkeepers who have a big hand up, kind of stopping you getting there when you probably should. If you can write a story and you've got a group of friends that are technically savvy, or not even that technically savvy, and you have some practitioners who can actually work together and have a lot of trust, it's kind of nothing you can't do with these phones. Like I say, it's if you can use natural light, all the better. If you can get good days to shoot in, and then have something pre-lit so you don't have to mess around, you can shoot stuff quite quickly too. It just comes with practice. I mean, we were lucky that our operator had operated handheld stuff before and was able to just jump in. And I think from the 3-month test we did out to shooting, he probably went away and did a lot of stuff on it, just kind of getting au fait. But yeah, and the Moondog people who gave us, who we got the lens from, they had good advice for us as well. And the Filmic Pro people happened to be in the country and came to New Zealand. They were doing something there and came on set and watched what we did. So we had some good technical know-how in terms of other people giving us advice. There's so much advice out there on the net that you can get as well.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Because you guys didn't really practice on the filming end, right?
No, we didn't really. We tried to do as little on-set rehearsal as possible, and it was really fly by the seat of your pants. I mean, it was kind of like making Lord of the Rings on a smaller scale. Lord of the Rings, we made up a lot of stuff as we went, and this is kind of true on this film as well. There's one dolly shot, and they just got a pram and put the DOP backwards in the pram and wheeled that across the forecourt. A little buggy thing that they kind of made up. So the more innovation in a film, the better, really, because it shows that people care if they're willing to jump in and make stuff work. And it's always nice to work on something where everyone's rooting for it to be good.
There's so much. It takes. I've been on film sets so many times where they're nothing like you though, okay, but there's so many times where the actors are saying, and I'm, trying to entertain them a little bit. I tend to be the entertainer in the set, right? And can you tell?
I can.
Yeah. So I'm like, how are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And they tell me right off the bat, they're like, I wish I was part of the crew because there's so much waiting around for the actors,
Yeah. Yeah.
And the crew is troubleshooting a lot, and they get to get creative, and they stay busy all the time. There's nothing you can't do.
I know we having worked, because I've worked as crew as well. I've been on Pete's Dragon, the Disney remake that they did here a couple of years ago. I was the movement coach for Oaks and Una, the two young members of the cast. So I had them for 6 weeks to kind of train them up to turn them into feral kids who climbing up trees and climbing up rocks and riding on dragons. And having worked for the horse department on Lord of the Rings, I certainly know where the glamour is. You get looked after really well as an actor, and it bugs me when I hear actors complaining because I know how hard crew actually work for not a lot of glory. And the great thing about this is really we're on set all the time. Mark and I were on set pretty much every minute of the film that we were actually filming. Same as the crew. There was not a lot of time where we got to go off and have a coffee or didn't have a trailer. None of that kind of luxury. And you work on the big films, you get all that, but that just slows the process down. If you've got 13 dwarves, say, that you have to dress for a scene, it takes 20 minutes to dress them, whereas it's just me and Mark, 30 seconds, and we're on set. So you have a lot more to do with the crew, and you kind of have more in common with the crew on a shoot like this. Everybody has to carry stuff, and everybody has to pull their weight, and the actors don't do a lot of sitting around, so that was good from that point of view. Like I say, there's only 2 scenes we went back and reshot for performance. So yeah, a lot of what you see on screen is our first take, which is that's always a good thing when the boom is not in shot, the lights work. it's in focus and the actors get it right and you can just move on, that's a blessing.
Yeah, when you just said that about the boom being in the shot, it's like no matter how hard you try, sometimes when you're using a phone, the person's looking at the subject, but
Yeah,
they're the boom is in the shot so many times, and there are other things that can get in the shot because of the size of the screen.
that's very true. And we had that problem because a lot of the BP we were shooting in, it had one whole side of it was glass. So we couldn't shoot in that direction at all because of the flare that we were getting off the windows. So, yeah, it means that you do have to have, my advice to people would be get your cast on whatever your set is and rehearse it. Just block it through with them, not being in character. They don't have to be in their costume, and just have a look at where your problems are going to be shooting in a certain direction. And then really map out with you and your actors how you're going to move through that space so that you can actually limit those kind of problems. We had a really good sound guy who worked on Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards, and he was able to hide microphones in certain places and lie down on the floor and kind of be, at the feet of our camera operator quite a lot of the time, and they kind of worked out themselves where the best place for the boom to be was before we even started shooting. So from that point of view, that's worth the time to go in there and kind of map out how you might want to do it so that you can limit those kind of what I would call technical impositions. Yeah,
definitely, for sure. I'm looking at the time, and where is it flying so fast? I'm enjoying. I could do another hour with you, but I know that you are busy right now. Are you able to say what you're working on right now?
The thing that I have been working on is just writing the script for, it's called The Mott, and I have deadlines where I have to finish certain things by certain times, so that's what I'm working on. And then the next thing that I'm doing is do some motion capture for a big group of films that are shooting here over the next 4 years, so gearing up to do that, which is going to be good.
Just 4 years? Did you just I can't even look beyond 10 minutes right now.
Yeah, they're not all shooting at once, but they're here shooting those films for quite a long time, and I've been lucky enough to do motion capture in this country as well. So that's another thing that I am able to do, is do motion capture on films, which is, it's a kind of a future-proofed thing for actors. If you can do that kind of thing and be the raw material for other people's films, and you're quite good at it, then there's a good career move in that direction. Motion capture, Andy Serkis has kind of created this whole new form of making films that is another thing again, and I've been lucky enough to do some of that.
So you love the challenges in this industry, don't you?
I do, and I think you kind of have to. The minute you think you've worked it out as well and you have nothing more to learn is the minute that you actually stop working or doing good work. I'm inspired by lots of people, and I think Andy Serkis is one of those people who just doesn't stop pushing the boundaries of what he's doing. And I never, like I said before last year, I never would have thought that you could shoot a film of the caliber of what we shot on a phone. And in terms of motion capture, the future is endless there as well. So yeah, I've got another 30 or 40 years in me, I reckon. I'm going to keep going once all my contemporaries have quit, and just keep doing them as long as I can stay fit and healthy. And the will is definitely there to go out there and make more stories. And if you have any of your listeners who, you have a good script and you've got a good production team and you're looking for a Kiwi to come and be your film, just don't hesitate.
I really wish I could go over there. I have some ideas already.
Find a way.
I have this little game that I want to play with you.
Cool.
It's called the Shout Out Game. We put every single one almost of our guests through the ring on this one.
Cool, that's great.
Oh, did I say the ring?
The ring, you did.
So basically, after listening to you speak, I've been formulating in my head a little bit about what this challenge, speaking of challenges, could be for you. So I'm going to put you on the spot. There's no planning on this. So you're ready for this?
I am.
Okay, so in 20 seconds, I want you to give a shout out to all of the directors that you've worked with and crew that have inspired you to stay in the game? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Set and go.
Peter Jackson, Steven Spielberg, John Landau, Jeff Murphy, Paul Murphy, Galen Preston. How many seconds is that? Oh, that's quite a few, isn't it? Miranda Harcourt, Gary Henderson. That's 20 seconds, is it?
Yep.
Well done. There wasn't too many. There's some good ones in there.
Yeah, no, you did it. Wow, yeah, you did name a lot, though. You named probably like 50 people.
Yeah.
You know, that's pretty good. So you do like a challenge and you thrive in it. How did you go from being, you said you were going to work in PE, you were going to be a coach, right?
Yeah. Drama was one paper that I did within that for Z unit, and yeah, someone came and saw me in a play. You had to do plays as part of doing that drama course. It was a 1-year course, and I thought I could go to drama school and teach phys ed and teach drama. But once I got to drama school and started doing theatre and audiences kind of stood up and appreciated it, I thought maybe I'd do this for a while. And my plan was always to go back to teaching when acting didn't turn out to be a good career move. But that never happened because it turned out to be a great career move.
Yeah, I'd say so. Plus, you know, honestly, it's very humbling to have you on our podcast show, someone in your caliber. I kid you not.
Well, it's my pleasure. I talk to a lot of people around the world about the industry and how inspiring it is for me. And if me being on here inspires other people to get out there and make their own stories, then I think that's a good thing.
Well, and that's actually great. A great segue to the finale here, because that's actually the entire mission and goal of why I put together this podcast. It's the voice of the mobile film industry, and the goal is to inspire people.
Excellent.
What would you say about storytelling, about the power of that?
I think it's the one thing that can actually change people from A to B, move them emotionally, storytelling. If it's a good story, you get people thinking and you get people talking, and it can be a great vehicle for change in terms of changing people's mindset. Unfortunately, with humans, we are what we see and we believe what we see. And if you can use this medium to touch people in a way emotionally that they actually think about some of the problems that we have in the country or in the world, or they can think about how they might treat people, or just telling a story that's actually of interest. It's a great form of entertainment, and we've all had it as part of our upbringing. Storytelling. It's one of those things that can never be replaced as a good story.
Yeah, most definitely. And what would you say to the professional filmmakers out there that just are, they still feel that mobile filmmaking has just too many limits for them?
Yeah, the limit is only your imagination. You know, the technology that goes with phones is catching up. But we used to shoot films where we had one big camera sticking on the sticks that everything had to move around it back in the day. You know, we've come a long way since silent filmmaking. And I think mobile filmmaking is kind of the future. It's a bit like when the silents became the talkies, and the talkies became colour, and then colour became 70mm, and then 35mm, and then digital. There's always something that comes along that actually can change the moment. And I personally think that phones can be that. The iPhone mobile filmmaking thing can be the future. It doesn't have to be something that people look down upon.
Okay, one last little thing. What would you like to say to, I know you can't come to our film festival this year, maybe next year. But what would you like to say to all the filmmakers? We've got over 15 filmmakers who all shot films. A couple of them are feature films.
Fantastic.
Yeah. What would you say to them? What would your message be to them this year? Bravo.
Can't wait to see your films. Wish I could be there with you, and then we could all sit and watch Blue Moon as well, because I think there's nothing better than being with a group of people who have a similar goal and a similar story to tell in terms of shooting in this way. So well done, all of you. Don't stop making. If you enjoy watching other people's, then go and tell them. You never know where that might lead as well. Be brave. If you like something, go and say so, because that could lead to something. You could lead to another job. And if you like if you like our film when you finally get to see it, like I say, don't be shy. Get in touch and tell us what you think. And I can't wait to see your films at your festival, so I hope I get to do that.
You will. Thank you. Say goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye, everybody, and thank you, Susan. It's been a pleasure.